Slayer has killed 300 people. The number of survivors quickly decreased. As Colin, the person who had arranged the largest group, had died, without an exception, the majority of the people tried to kill each other to escape. However, there were still a few who decided to stay. The blessing from the tower allowed survivors to lose their fears and stick together. At 200 kills, they received a toughness blessing. At 250 kills, they received an iron wool blessing, and finally at 300 kills, they received the guardian blessing. Isn't it trying hard? Muyang lightly clicked his tongue after reading the message about the guardian blessing. It was a blessing that could only be used by quite high-ranked priests. A penalty that wasn't really a penalty was created. Either Muyang had to die or everyone else did for this fight to end. Now he couldn't even give up. Of course he wasn't planning to, but still it was going to the extremes. Winner gets all. The last one standing would get everything. Muyang was already very used to this method. It wasn't originally this kind of an extreme world. He turned around and looked at the ghouls. Meanwhile, the number ghouls have increased to 30. There was something unique about these ghouls. They had a bit of a dark aura mixed into their skin. And in the middle of them there was a ghoul that was particularly dark. Dark Ghoul. The prince and his subjects. As a matter of fact, after making Colin into an undead, he had turned into that creature. An ability to reinforce the 30 ghouls under his supervision had been created when his head was put back together. When Muyang looked at the dark ghoul created from Colin's corpse, information about it appeared on the status viewer. Level 56. Type, Ghoul. Strength 65, 60 plus 5. Agility 60, 55 plus 5. Stamina 55, 50 plus 5. Intelligence 44, 39 plus 5. Wisdom 46, 41 plus 5. Plus Dark Aura. The 30 chosen ghouls' stats will increase by 5. Plus Decent Tolerance to Light. Plus Loss of Vision, Superior Sense of Hearing. Even the Dark Ghoul had its stats raised by 5. Since the number in front of the brackets were the finalized values, if he only considered just the basic stats, it was higher than Muyang. Although stats weren't everything in a battle, it was at least an objective indicator of one's capabilities. I've gained something unexpected. Muyang never guessed that Colin could be turned into this good of an undead. It meant that Colin had that much of an overwhelming story. Not only that, but since he was recognized as Prince and his subjects, not one but many, he could now place the 31 ghouls under one talisman. It was now a question of whether all the blessing given to the rest of the people in the tower to counterbalance Muyang would be able to stop these undead. Grr. The dark ghoul laid down flat on the floor and pricked up his ears. Although he had lost his vision, he instead gained a greater sense of hearing and was able to catch even the finest details. Geek. Unlike the zombies, the dark ghoul was able to make decisions by himself and soon started to run towards his prey while letting out a horrible shriek. The 30 ghouls followed soon afterwards. Then, Muyang couldn't just play around. The time had come to end this fight. After 350 kills, no other blessing was given. Maybe it had assumed that no one could massacre more than 300 people? He could only know just how many survivors were left and how many people he had slain. Even then, Muyang was still calm. To enter the tower, the requirement was that the person had to have murdered someone. Also, most of the people entered to kill another. Even though there were some who entered not because they wanted to, he didn't have the time to take care of them. He couldn't hesitate any longer. It wasn't enough to just step onwards. There were too many strong enemies Muyang had to face. 396 people. Swish. With a large shake, Muyang brushed off a large amount of blood on Anguish. No one else had survived. Muyang walked in between the dead bodies. I'm missing 4 people. For some reason he felt sad. The numbers didn't exactly fall clean. He thought that like the blessing, the reward might have been decided upon every 50 kills. However, no one was left alive. In sadness, as he sheathed Anguish, letters started to appear and combine. Who almost accomplished. It was definitely different from the last time he earned the Deathlord class. At that time he had received a special reward instead of an incredible. As expected, was it because he didn't have 400 kills? Since it seemed like he would get a reward every 50 kills, and since he had killed 394 people, he thought he was going to get the reward for 350 kills. Myung clicked his tongue. He waited for the reward, but then a story he never thought of appeared before his eyes. Death Lord, objects. The reward has changed. The impossible that has been almost accomplished has been changed to accomplished. This had never happened in all of his 40 years. Even more, the fact that the Masters of Darkness were responsible for this change in the reward. Besides the Death Lord, they were names unfamiliar to him. The Masters of the Darkness who couldn't become gods. Solomon had died and instead the laws were left behind. And through the conversation with Merlin, Myung knew that those who overlooked the laws were recognized as the Masters of Darkness. However, Merlin didn't even know the specifics about the Masters of Darkness. Possibly because the Masters of Darkness were superior beings to Merlin? Through this opportunity, Myung found out how many were part of the Masters. 11 beings. Those who supported were 4 and those who forfeited were 6. And if you added the Death Lord by simple calculations, there were 11 in total. However, it didn't seem like the Masters of Darkness were simply managers. Even if their identities were in a fog, like how Myung was chosen by the Death Lord and was given a class related to him, it was likely that other masters could also choose someone as well. Death Lord, the Lord class. The undead made by the Art of Death skill were much stronger than a normal undead. Depending on the rank, it should have more destructive power than most secret classes. The classes offered by the other 10 masters would probably be the same. While putting a bit of strength in his eyes, he focused on the letters that appeared. Soon after, a red ring, helmet and cape appeared on top of Myung's hand. Swish. Miai. And beside him a huge horse about 3 meters tall jumped out. Its hoofs, tail and mane were blazing with blue fire. It had dark skin and great big wings like a Pegasus, but Myung almost pulled out his sword instinctively after looking at the creature. A top-ranking monster. Even in the underworld, there weren't many monsters considered to be in the top ranks. Usually, people identified dragons and their mixed bloodlines, giants, hydras and other creatures as top-ranking monsters. And the hell horse that appeared before Myung had the magic power that was comparable to a dragon's. Just by facing the creature made Myung's whole body tingle. It became hard for him to breathe and all his pores were dripping with sweat. Even if the monsters that appeared at the temple were strong, they were merely low-ranked. Something like a dark ghoul would barely pass the threshold into the intermediate rankings. But all of a sudden a top-ranked monster appeared. If it was someone other than Myung, they would have fainted already. The hell horse looked down on Myung. Nay. Afterward it snorted heavily. A top-ranking monster could wipe out a reasonably sized guild or a clan. As of now, even if Myung gave it all he had, he would be unable to win against the hell horse. For some reason he didn't sense any killing intent. Myung quickly calmed down. It was one of Myung's specialties to adapt to any situation. When the hell horse watched Myung instantly return his breathing back to normal, the horse looked surprised as it nickered. I accept. Nay. As if it was telling Myung he had made a good decision, it spread its wings widely. Probably thought it benefited, but Myung also did it intentionally. It's enough. The rewards were more than what he had expected to receive in the beginning. It was truly impossible to simply tame a top-ranking monster. Even the Dragon Lord had to overcome tens of life-threatening situations and succeed in 10 consecutive achievements in order to tame the magical dragon. For now, being helped 3 times was more than enough. Just like that, it was the same as a decent guild moving at his command. Depending on how he used them, these 3 opportunities could prove to be an enormous help. And Myung was one of the few people who could use these opportunities wisely. I could look around a dangerous area. As for now, Headley Cow was all that was on his mind. A fairy that could transform into any appearance. In the end, it turns into a phoenix. If he could just grab hold of the Headley Cow in that transformed state, he could benefit from it tremendously. Even though he had a long-distance teleportation magical item, since it was in a demon god's territory, he didn't know where to start. But with this, he believed he could advance more quickly than before. Besides that, couple memories came back to him regarding where he could use the hell horse. If I beat it before using all my 3 chances, that will do. Also, if Muyang grew stronger before he used all his chances, that was good enough. Or figured out a way to win. He had many options. It was just that it took him time. Muyang considered taming the hell horse as a definite fact. The gate to the underworld opens in 2 days. He cleared his mind and nodded. The tower appeared on the 25th day. Within just 3 days he was able to overcome the trial and receive a reward greater than what he had imagined. This was enough to enter the underworld in 2 days. It would be enough to be free from the clutches of the Forest of Death and Wang Chunglin. The past will not repeat itself. In the past he was kidnapped without being able to even resist them. Afterwards, with all the different kinds of drugs and brainwashing, he was turned into an absolute perfect assassin. He lived a meaningless life like a machine for 40 years. Once was more than enough. Muyang clenched his teeth. Whoosh. Afterwards, a bright light surrounded Muyang. A mountain with swirling snow. Tens of white troll corpses were scattered along the side of the mountain. The gruesome scene revealed that these corpses were smashed to pieces. There was a man in between these corpses. Ice trolls were ranked high among the middle-ranked monsters. Tens of these trolls, which most strong fighters wouldn't even fight one alone, were cleaned out solely by the man who sat down and mumbled. Troll King B** teach only good at running away while causing trouble. Troll King. The king of trolls who was incomparable to regular trolls. There were even rumors that he was so gigantic that ogres avoided him. But this man talked about the Troll King lightly as if he was talking about his neighbor's dog. However, he had a qualification to do so. The Fighting King Lucien. He was the wild man who was known as the person closest to humanity's top 10. He didn't join a guild or clan and only acted by himself. However, no group attempted to recruit this man. His fighting style was the embodiment of craziness. He wouldn't discriminate between friend or foe and would smash everyone. He was quite a ways apart from being helpful in group battles. Usually, due to his unstable state, he was banned from entering all cities. However, that didn't worry him at all as he was originally a wild man living by himself. There are tons of bastards to catch, but this Troll King is being a pain. Ha fucking bastard. He had come all this way to complete a certain trial. Wang. Just then his status viewer rang suddenly. As Lucien wrinkled his forehead to look, renewed information appeared. The record of the tower has been broken. Just like his name, the Fighting King, Lucien has left countless record on Solomon's Hall of Fame. However, there weren't many cases of his records being broken. Of course, even if they were, he didn't care all that much. They were all bastards anyways. However, he couldn't help but widen his eyes when he looked at the renewed record. 400 people. Just what kind of bastard is he? The name that appeared was no name. It meant he purposely hid his name. This happened before not too long ago. He was notified when the killing record at the temple was broken. Even at that time, no name took first place. It was highly likely they were the same person. It's been a long time since I've seen a bastard who seems crazier than me. Lucien knew that he himself wasn't normal. But this person was even more absurd. Lucien's record was 111 people, but this bastard's record was 400. Even demonstrating his cleverness by cold-heartedly hiding his name. Hiya. Just who was it? His curiosity was aroused. He'll soon go through the gate at the temple and arrive at a great city. Should I go watch? Although there was an important trial, Lucien was a person who would only follow his heart. If he became curious, he had to immediately satisfy it. Even though he was hiding himself, a crazy man would always recognize his kind. Perhaps he would be the only one to find the true identity of that person. Although he was banned from entering great cities, Lucien shrugged his shoulders. He was the Fighting King. He was one of the few who held the title of a king. And there was no one who could block a king's path. Muyang wasn't the only one to exit the tower. Flutter. After blowing air out of its mouth, the hell horse broadly spread its wings and flew up to the sky. Muyang didn't really care. He would probably loiter around his surroundings while keeping an eye on him. If not, it wouldn't be able to come promptly if Muyang was in danger. The lunatic sovereign set Although he was preoccupied with the hell horse, the 3 equipment he received in the tower were equally important. However, he would have never thought that the lunatic sovereign would be a set. Moreover, he was able to receive all 3 set pieces in the tower. Seemed like he was rewarded a piece after killing 200, 250 and 300 people. If you gather items that are part of a set, you will receive an effect greater than its rank. Normally, only items used by legendary figures were judged to be a set. It meant that it was that much rarer and harder to find. It was the type of equipment he would have never been able to receive at the temple. As he carefully gazed at the equipment, related information appeared. Name: Lunatic Sovereign's Ring. Rank A. Classification: Equipment. Durability: 25,000. Effect: all stats +4 when close to death, you will become a lunatic warrior by consuming stamina. Name: Lunatic Sovereign's Helmet. Rank: B++. Classification: Equipment. Durability: 25,000. Effect: all stats +3 stamina +5. Name: Lunatic Sovereign's Cape. Rank: B++. Classification: Equipment. Durability: 25,000. Effect: all stats +3 stamina +5. Asterisk set effect: 3/3 all stats +5. You do not consume stamina as a lunatic warrior. Myung blinked. Each equipment increased all of his stats. All stats had the very important property of even increasing new created stats. Equipment that had this property were considered to be in the top among their ranks. But if he was to add the values together, it was an increase of 15. Stamina was even increased by a further 10. This was better than combining a few A-ranked equipment. It was safe to say it was strongest equipment he could receive at the Blue Temple. It seems like this effect was the reason why Ben ran amok. Ben the Slaughterer. He had another name besides being a human butcher. Lunatic Warrior. Just like the name, he would become a crazy warrior. Although it stated that it would give a continuous effect while consuming the user's stamina, the user's mind would also be affected. So the user had to be careful when using items with these kinds of effects or skills. Those that had weak willpower would be consumed. Especially since this would only take effect when the user had taken a fatal blow, he had to be even more careful. Didn't Ben the Slaughterer eventually become half crazy after becoming the lunatic warrior? Reversing the tables in one shot. Although he eventually brought his own end through the consumption of stamina, due to his transformation as the lunatic warrior, Myung experienced a life-threatening crisis during his assassination attempt. Even when he was inflicted with tens of fatal wounds, he would try to take Myung down with him until the very end. He seemed invulnerable, and the reason for that was this ring. Myung didn't hesitate as he equipped all 3 items he had in his hands. Finally, his whole body was filled with strength. His vision became wider and his senses became more sensitive. Burning excitement. He felt like he could do anything. 2 rings left. The Lunatic Sovereign's Ring was necessary for obtaining the S-ranked weapon, Diabolos. And the key to that was made up of 3 rings in total. Oris's Throne Ring and Hamel's Rune Ring. I will definitely find them. He knew where the other 2 were. Although it would take some time, he planned to take both rings for himself. To see the changes in his abilities, Myung turned his status viewer. Achievement effect: Agremory's Anguish. A +3 to all abilities. Class effect: a Death Lord, Lord class, Ruler of Death. That's a Strength 64, 38 + 26. Agility 59, 41 + 18. Stamina 66, 38 + 28. Intelligence 35, 17 + 18. Wisdom 35, 17 + 18. Fighting Aura 40, 22 + 18. Magic Resistance 28, 10 + 18. Special note: Fighting Aura has been awakened. Equipped and invoked equipment: Anguish, Strength +5. Herculean Strength Leather Armor, Strength +3. Lunatic Sovereign's Set, all stats +15, Stamina +10. These were not the stats a beginner with less than a month of experience at the temple could possess. No matter how quickly your stats increased, most would have to train for 1 or 2 years to be able to barely reach this threshold. Although it had a lot to do with his equipment, nothing was achievable without effort. His equipment could definitely be considered as Muyang's strength. Hyungnim, you've come out. He saw many people near the temple entrance. Including Kim Tae-hwan, Kang Baek-soo and Bae Suzy. About 15 people were grouped together. They were a mess, as if they had just finished hunting in the forest. It was because they had captured a boar and collected a few different kinds of medicinal herbs. You look awful. Hyungnim became more stylish. Tae-hwan admired after approaching and glancing at Muyang's outfit. The equipment from the lunatic sovereign were all blood red. Especially the helmet, which would cover his face and had wing-like ornaments on either side, would catch people's attention. I have to make them into talismans and use them when I need them. When they go through the gates, there was nothing good in catching people's attention when they arrive at a great city in the underworld. Although it was a huge event with the arrival of tens of thousands of people, the lunatic sovereign's set had an especially eye-catching color and shape. To find the one who entered the Hall of Fame, there will be guilds and clans intensely looking for me. It was an obvious sequence of events. It wasn't like Muyang only broke 1 or 2 records in Solomon's Hall of Fame. If he was to wear the lunatic sovereign's equipment, it was inevitable that he would place at the top of the list of suspects. Muyang silently looked at the people around him. I guess I have to use a camouflage tactic. He would conceal himself and draw attention to the others. Muyang nodded his head and said, I have something to tell you all. Sizzle sizzle. The captured boar was placed above a campfire and roasted with some herbs. Once people gathered around him, Muyang started to talk. In 2 days a door will open. Baek-soo became surprised as he asked. A door? Why will that door lead us back to our old world? No. It will lead us to a much more hellish place. Sorry? Then can't we choose not to enter? Do you know the reason why there are a set amount of monsters that enter the temple every day? I don't know. It's because there is an invisible barrier. And in 2 days that barrier will dissipate. There will be thousands of monsters frequenting the temple every day. If that was the case, no one would be able to resist. There was no other choice but to enter the gates. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock. No one had heard of this until now. Since he never felt the need to tell them, Muyang hadn't told them until now. When you go through the gates, you will meet a countless number of people. It's better if you think of everyone you meet as your enemy, as the weak will be hunted immediately. Every month, at most tens of thousands of people would pass through the gates. However, the population of the underworld was limited. In such an infertile land, there was no way to sustain everyone. It inevitably led to pruning. Although there were people who thought to just leave it as it was, the influential monsters wished that all cases were under their control. That was the reason why they accepted the necessary and threw out the rest. Although the situation wasn't funny, the underworld was made up of this extreme environment. If you don't want to die, follow me. We'll gather equipment in the forest. He determined that if the average level of equipment was to rise, his existence would be slightly more hidden and that there could be other uses as well. After all, they would end up moving in groups once they passed through the gates. Although Muyang could display the strength of several groups, he would gain too much attention. Muyang was planning to display an adequate amount of strength before escaping the great city. Didn't you say that the door would open in 2 days? I don't know if we will have enough time. This time it was Tae-hwan who asked. Muyang nodded his head. Suitable equipment was scattered in the forest. With the hunting map, there was no need to worry about getting lost, and low-ranked monsters were no longer Muyang's match. Also, everyone else had developed to a state where they were able to hunt. 2 days are enough. Muyang coolly answered. 2 days were more than enough. If they moved like he did with Merlin and hunted non-stop without even a second of rest, they would be able to equip everyone with suitable equipment. Hunting for only 2 days was as simple as breathing to Muyang. On the other hand, it was going to be a hellish march for everyone else. We will follow you. The title of the group leader was passed from Tae-hwan to Muyang. It was because they had recognized through past experiences that it was best to listen to Muyang when it came to survival. Ha ha ha. This is crazy. They finally realized something was wrong after a whole day had passed. They continued on their forced march, reducing the time to eat, rest, and even piss. On the other hand, Muyang didn't show any apparent change. Like always, he had the same expressionless look as he engaged himself in the fight. Monster. There really wasn't a need for a different word. But it wasn't like they could stop. Everyone knew that he wasn't the type to help others who fell behind. Being left alone in the forest meant death. Those that valued their own lives would follow Muyang and hold their dissatisfaction inside. Here it is. Muyang was able to find different items in caves and forests as if he was drawn to them like a magnet. He acted as if he knew the locations of where everything was. Muyang really did know the locations of items, but people including Taehwan just looked at him with amazement. As time passed, one by one people started to get geared. The territory of Jumbo Antlion's pits. This was the location where Muyang and his group were currently at. Although they would die if they accidentally stumbled and fell into the Antlion's pits, Muyang could sense their presence underneath the sand pit. They were able to walk the path where Jumbo Antlions weren't present and take what they came here for. Muyang nodded as he looked at the equipment stored in talismans. Horn helmet and chain armor. C-rank equipment. It was too heavy and too low ranking of an item for Muyang to use. But compared to the regular items they could earn in the temple, they were quite decent. You can use it. Whoosh. As Muyang threw the items, a well-built man who was nearby caught it. Muyang turned around. He tried to use his knowledge to the best of his abilities. However, even Muyang couldn't know everything. Although he could remember the overall picture, he couldn't remember all the fine details of where trivial equipment was located. That was why Muyang decided to go around the whole place. The forest wasn't as large as it seemed to be. It was because the topography changed every midnight that it seemed large. But if you just knew the way, you could go around the whole forest in 5 days. Of course, it was too much to go all the way around the forest with only a day remaining. However, if they followed a decent path, he could gear up 15 people with the bits of information he had. You could earn an information distortion talisman by killing the most diverse number of species. Also, he had another intention. It was one of the methods he thought of when he was trying to think of a way to roam around the underworld. Information distortion talisman. There were some people in the underworld who specialized in finding out information of others. Even if Muyang tried to hide his identity, they could read his information just by looking at him. He realized that if he avoided their eyes, he could gain more time and thought that the information distortion talisman was the way to go. The information distortion talisman was a type of trick item, where only the information Muyang set beforehand would be readable. Since it was very rare, not many people knew of this item. It was common sense that it would be impossible for a beginner to possess such an item. They weren't able to openly show that they were looking for him. There were people who would try to find him. However, all the guilds and clans all kept each other in check. If a large group showed signs that they were trying to find Muyang, even if they didn't know the reason, other groups would hold them back. The underworld was that kind of place. There were many who couldn't bear to see others do well. It was obvious that they could only move secretly in a small group, and it would be most effective if they used individuals who had abilities in information gathering. As they could find out just by looking. They would try to find out who No Name was among the strong. The information distortion talisman was his hidden card to avoid their eyes. On top of that, he would increase others' appeal so that they get more confused. Muyang was aiming to buy more time than to deceive others. He didn't think he could completely deceive everyone. What Muyang wanted was to just buy enough time to get what he wanted and leave the great city while they wasted their time looking for him. I need to enter the Sky Library. Sky Library. It was the place with plentiful amounts of knowledge. The place where beginners could gain knowledge after they arrived in the underworld. Nowadays, the meaning had changed, but either way, because of its importance, it was within bounds to say that the great city was built on the site where the Sky Library was located. However, there was a daily limit on the number of people who could enter the library. That was why, for beginners, they needed to have a good score from the pruning trial. Eye of the Sky. It was the name of the skill that could greatly help Muyang as he moved forward. Its value was incomparable to a generic skill in information gathering. The Eye of the Sky helped the user read and know all the knowledge that existed in the Sky Library. Of course, it could only be earned in the Sky Library. I need to move right away. Everyone started to move as they grabbed hold of their legs that felt like they were going to break. Muyang quietly moved his index finger to the tip of his nose. Then everyone held their breath and looked towards the front. A giant Leo was sitting on top of a rock enjoying his nap. He left his group since he was too old. His age could be estimated by the color and thickness of his mane. Normally giant Leos lived as a group. However, when they aged they usually left their group to live alone. Of course Muyang couldn't disregard him. Giant Leo was the king of the forest. The one on the very top of the food chain, the monster who ate up the other monsters in the forest. From the second boss fight, one could know how much of a diabolical monster it was when even the Shamba hesitated because of his scent. I could do it alone. However, he was no match for Muyang in his current state. He concluded that he could easily hunt the beast using the lunatic sovereign's set and the undead. However, Muyang wasn't planning on approaching him first. A way of fighting against a strong opponent. Normally they had to learn this by taking part in the boss battles, but didn't Muyang always finish them by himself? Because of this, they never really learned to fight against a strong opponent. Muyang lightly tapped Taehwan's shoulders and pointed toward the giant Leo, and then quietly spoke. For him to go first. Gulp. Taehwan nervously grabbed hold of his shield of eradication. Then Muyang gestured the rest to spread apart. By following his gestures, everyone started to move and eventually the hunt began. Gah! Taehwan got the Leo's attention by screaming. Girl! The giant Leo, who was woken from a nap, let out a horrible roar and jumped down from the rock. The rest of the close-range soldiers waited for an opportunity as they closed in from behind. Scream from every direction. Giant Leos had large territories. Since he already figured out that he was not in a group but alone, there was no need to worry. Soon, by Muyang's orders, everyone started to scream. Gah! Hee-ha! Hoo-ha! Growl. As if he was unable to think straight, he let out another loud roar. Don't stop. People were taken back by his vigor, but Muyang kept inciting them to continue. If they were intimidated by just one monster, they couldn't survive the underworld. Hoo-ah! Of course, the first to move was Taehwan. However, the one that moved right after him was Suzy. Suzy was holding the sword and shield of Dawn. There was no need for her to join the rest to find equipment because her secret class was good. But she decided to join the others for her own development. Not bad. The splendors of the secret class were certainly being revealed. She has passed the level where she could be disregarded for being young. Overall, in terms of fighting power, she was better than the average adult. If she gained more experience and became a bit harsher, a great soldier would be born. Damn it! Taehwan swore. It was because his nape was injured by the giant Leo's claws. However, he calmly defended his place. Thanks to him, other people were able to attack the Leo much easier. Ha! Gasp! Stupid monster! Ha! And after 20 minutes of a long fight, they were able to succeed in killing the giant Leo. When everyone thought that the hunt was over, they all sat down where they were standing. As their minds and bodies were relaxing. Grr! The giant Leo, who everyone thought was dead, targeted and jumped towards Taehwan's back. Taehwan also felt him approaching but didn't have any time to react. Was he just going to die like this? Taehwan tightly closed his eyes. Thep. Muyang spoke along with the sound of something being stabbed. An old giant Leo is skilled. They even know how to play dead. Afterwards, he pulled out the dagger which pierced through the middle of the giant Leo's forehead. Thank you. Just because the fight has ended, it doesn't mean that that's the end. Don't relax until the very end. I'll bear that in mind. Taehwan nodded heavily. Although they made the mistake of loosening up at the end, but it wasn't bad overall. If it was 2 days ago, this would have been impossible. They were able to hunt the giant Leo without much difficulty because they had all geared up. They should be able to get a good result from the pruning trial. It seemed like he would be able to climb the sky library. They were stronger than the average beginner. Finally, messages appeared in the air. First, no name, 121 species. Second, Kim a Hin 120 species. Third, Lucy 98 species. Kim a Hin, the monster scholar. There was no need to say anything about Lucian, but a new name appeared from the temple. However, Muyang was well aware of this woman. It was only through the assassination of a Hin that he was able to obtain information about the information distortion talisman. She was a strange woman who studied monsters and wanted to find a way to be on friendly terms with them. Blue Temple. Much more monsters had been recorded in your history. Without a hesitation, Muyang chose the camouflage talisman. On the spot, Muyang used the yellow talisman that appeared on top of his hand. Lunatic Sovereign's set could just be made into a talisman and placed inside the infinity pouch. Then if he disguised the infinity pouch, no one would notice. All that was left was resetting his stats. Not too strong but not too weak. As he rubbed his chin, he inputted reasonable numbers. After all, it was only a disguise. Muyang didn't actually become any weaker. Muyang nodded after he verified the short message. The preparations were finished. He couldn't be 100% certain, but it was enough to buy him some time. It wasn't like any of the people around him knew exactly what Muyang did or what he had earned. Besides that, he was planning on taking further measures. For the rest, he thought to take care of them when the opportunity arises. He didn't really worry too much. Even if an unlikely situation occurred, there were still many ways to escape. By using the Hell Horse or the long-distance teleportation magical item, he could avert a crisis. After collecting the equipment from the giant Leo's territory, Muyang spoke. Let's return. Within the group of 15 people, only 3 actually understood Muyang. Kim Taehwan, Bei Suzy and Kong Baeksu. They were the ones who completed the trials of the Star of David, and the ones who were with him in the front lines during boss battles. That was why they knew more about Muyang than others, even though that was only the tip of the iceberg. However, it was better to set up a small safeguard. If someone took extreme measures to find information on him, it wasn't impossible to expose Muyang's identity early. He didn't need a lot. Muyang decided to do one last thing. The subconscious. The subconscious was something that influenced a person's actions. Something that the person himself couldn't notice. It was the territory of the mind that even one's consciousness couldn't approach. The subconscious was something that would stay dormant until triggered by a specific action or thought. Then it would manifest in one's consciousness. The chief of the Forest of Death, Wang Chunglin, used his strange skills and the subconscious of his victims to brainwash them into members of the Forest of Death. He made them into puppets who didn't fear death and skillfully erased his presence from their minds. Because of this, Wang Chunglin lived only as a shadow that no one was aware of. This was the decisive reason why no one knew the true identity of Wang Chunglin besides Muyang. As Wang Chunglin used vicious methods that would even erase one's consciousness, Muyang would have lived the remainder of his life as a puppet if he didn't break through the limit. To preserve his disappearing self, Muyang instinctively read the history of his target status viewers, which helped him build up his mental defense. Only because of these countless stories slowly bringing his subconscious back out was he able to break free from the brainwashing and annihilate the Forest of Death. Didn't stories play an important role in the Art of Death skill as well? Perhaps even getting the Death Lord class was unavoidable. Anyways, Wang Chunglin used countless methods to erase the consciousness of his greatest assassin, Muyang, and through this Muyang was able to understand his methods little by little. I think it's possible to execute the second stage at most. Methods of manipulating the subconscious were divided into 3 general stages. First stage. Manipulate the surface layer of one's conscious to control their actions. Second stage. Make a special action trigger a single idea that will change their conscious. Third stage. Increase the boundaries of their unconsciousness and erode their mind. Wang Chunglin was able to freely use any of the 3 stages to manipulate one's subconscious. Muyang thought it was possible to execute up to the second stage. Up to the second stage was still considered relatively easy. It wasn't impossible to make someone not reveal information about him or avoid certain situations when they see a specific action. On top of that, it could also strengthen their mental defense in preparation for unlikely situations. It is the only way to escape from Wang Chunglin's evil influence. Although it wasn't a method he particularly liked, it was the most optimal one. It would be helpful to Muyang and it wasn't bad for everyone else as well. Wang Chunglin was a master of manipulating minds. It might be of help when they experience even the slightest touch of his evil influence. If they were strong with high intelligence, this would be useless. However, as they were weak, it was only obvious they had to prepare beforehand. My real enemies are the demon gods that changed this world. Muyang didn't forget his original objective. Although the hatred for the forest of death ran deep, Muyang placed the demon gods as the root cause. He believed that the world changed because there were demon gods that wanted to annihilate humans and that their deaths would be his final objective in living a meaningful life. He regarded himself as a hero that wasn't a hero because he wanted to remove all the obstacles in his path. Even if he was someone who was called a hero in the past. If they didn't obstruct his way, he wouldn't go out of his way to disturb them either. However, there was no reason not to move obstacles that were in his way. That was why he didn't hold getting his identity exposed in any regard. It was enough if he could gain sufficient time to enter the Sky Library. Muyang fundamentally acted alone. This wouldn't change in the future. If there were other heroes that wanted to kill the demon gods, he could provide some help but would never join them. Muyang was Muyang and they were them. As their methods were different, it was best not to bother each other. Also, didn't he personally witness human gatherings collapse frivolously? This was the reason why Muyang resolved himself to obtain everything himself. On top of that, the underworld was a place where the strong were able to defeat the masses. He would become a true superhuman and annihilate his enemies. I guess I have to get started. There wasn't much time until the gates would open. Hehe, is it tasty? Muyang and Suzy were sitting together. Suzy was playing around with the Emperor of Shrew Mice, King, with her fingers. She giggled as she watched King chewing on a bean with gusto. Taehwan, Baeksu and everyone else would be nervous when facing Muyang. However, Suzy was different from everyone and wasn't nervous at all. It was probably due to her good senses that she realized Muyang didn't really have any bad intentions. She followed Muyang based her instincts. The best type for burrowing into one's subconscious. Manipulating one's subconscious wasn't something that could be done to anyone. That was if you weren't at Wang Chenglin's level. First, there must be some trust and confidence towards the manipulator. It had to be to the point where if one was to claim that a regular stone was gold, the other would say, "It really could be gold. You're enduring better than I thought." Really? I always think I'm constantly making mistakes. Everyone makes those mistakes. The moment was approaching. The most important thing to do first was to get the target to open up their heart. Although Wang Chenglin would use hallucinations, the side effects were too strong. Also, there weren't any lies in Muyang's words. It was possible because Suzy's adaptability was outstanding. It might even be easier for her to comply because she was so young. Also, her basic fighting strength was better than most adults. A surprising level for her age. It was definitely worth paying attention to her future growth. Then that's a relief, hehe. Suzy smiled brightly. Her smile seemed to be more relaxed than before. Do you remember my warnings? Don't show your watch to others, don't try to show off until you have indisputable strength, and if you're going to do something, put all your effort into it? Although they were passing words, she had fortunately remembered them all. As soon as Muyang nodded his head, Suzy clapped her hands and held out her status viewer. Right. I got a weird skill. I read the description, but the words were too difficult and I couldn't understand it. Did she forget the words she just said? It didn't seem that way. It felt like she just didn't consider Muyang as another. Muyang clicked his tongue as he accepted her status viewer and examined it. Achievement effect -none. Class effect Valkyrie of Dawn. Secret, there will be light after hardships. Strength 30, agility 30. Stamina 30, intelligence 30, wisdom 30. Special note, none. Skill name, Sword of Dawn D. Description, summon the Sword of Dawn. Skill name, Shield of Dawn D. Description, summon the Shield of Dawn. Skill name, Suffering and Hardship D. Description, soft on the outside, but strong and firm on the inside. 1. You cannot gain any stats from skills or equipment. However, all basic stats will rise quickly. It's a good skill. Like he expected, it seemed like the Valkyrie of Dawn was a class that raised all stats equally. However, Muyang admired her last skill. It could be considered the best skill for those who didn't have the ability to find outstanding equipment like Muyang. Unfortunately, since this skill wouldn't be able to increase her stats limitlessly and due to the increasing importance of good equipment later on, he wondered how this class would overcome these limitations, as it would be the determining factor of who was strong and who was weak. Mu-young handed back her watch and told her what the word meant. It just means as long as you try hard you will continuously get stronger. Then I can be of more help in the future. Did you hear that, King King? You have to look up to me. Suzy yawned as she rubbed King King's chin. But why am I suddenly sleepy? Looking at her hazy, partly opened eyes, Mu-young decided that this was the moment. The faint sleeping scent he had released had finally taken effect. Look at my finger. Okay. After getting her to concentrate on his right index finger, he gently pressed it in the middle of her forehead. It would serve as the link to her consciousness. Concentrate. You have to put all your consciousness into this finger. This wasn't something that would bring forth a large change. The best Mu-young could do was take out her consciousness and plant 2 commands in her subconscious which resided deep in her mind. One was to not expose Mu-young and the other was to prepare for the unlikely situation by increasing her mental defense. As Suzy nodded her head with a dazed expression, Mu-young continued on with his work. Rumble. The ground was shaking. Countless shooting stars were falling from the sky. A strong wind blew as a gate opened in the middle of the temple. Let's go. Mu-young walked ahead. The rest followed behind with very nervous expressions. Once they passed through the gates, a wave of slight dizziness fell on them. Mu-young held his forehead as the black surroundings changed and he returned back to reality shortly after. Where is this? Why are there so many people? Commotion erupted all around. Mu-young looked around at his surroundings. Around 1,000 people were standing on a vast plain. The pruning has started. It was different from the past. In the past, almost 10,000 people from the 9 guilds and 5 great clans received the beginners, including Mu-young. However, this time they were dropped on the trial grounds with no explanation. What was more was seeing how there were only 1,000 people. It seemed like they were divided into separate groups. As he waited, fortunately, information about the trial appeared on his status viewer. Judge. He tilted his head as he faced this unfamiliar word, however, shortly after he understood its meaning. I am the judge. You trashy bastards. Blaze. Maybe he had just turned 15. The boy who was standing in the middle of the crowd, the one who called himself the judge, had large flames surrounding his whole body. He wore a shiny helmet adorned with fire dragon and held an enormous spear in his hand. Glittering equipment that was at least A-ranked. He must be the direct descendant of the Fire Dragon clan. His face was one that Mu-young remembered seeing in his memories. Generally, guilds were founded by Westerners while clans were founded by Chinese and other Asians. If they excluded some traditional traits and the name, there weren't any real differences between a guild and a clan. Although the Fire Dragon clan wasn't one of the 5 great clans, they were a large group that received the same treatment as them. Were the judges just the rising talents of various groups? Mu-young smirked. Now that he thought about it, it seemed like each group sent their rising talents into the trial to show off their strength while pruning the beginners. My name is Fire Dragon Wu. If you don't want to die, kill me. Or else, all of you will die by my hands. Blaz. A coarse flame rose out of Fire Dragon Wu's spear. This was the symbol of wealth and power of an establishment that had built themselves for tens of years in the underworld. This was the roar of a young monster who was raised by spending an eye-popping amount of treasures. Mu-young could easily tell who the other 4 judges were. At the same time, he figured out the location of where they may be. Vast plains. Although there were the sky and the sun, this wasn't the underworld. Mu-young noticed that the atmosphere and the concentration of magic power were completely different from the underworld. Box of Trials. The Box of Trials was an item that allowed people to set up their own trial and rewards. It would automatically transport people who enter a particular area, and it was set up behind the gates so that people who passed through would be forced to enter. By seeing how elaborate the setup was, Mu-young could tell that they put in a lot of effort. Those judges. Kids from each group probably entered beforehand. All rising talents were occasionally tested with trials like this. The system wouldn't have given trials to only the newcomers. Clearly, a similar message had to be given to those 5 kids as well. Of course, the situations of those 5 kids and the 1,000 newcomers who gathered here were completely different. It was because the establishments that have dominated the underworld for about 50 years had spent all their mind-boggling treasures to create these 5 people. Especially due to the nature of clans, the clan heads would have more authority than guild masters. This could lead to a more drastic difference in allocated resources. In fact, the meaning of clans was different from the general term. Clan members would normally be related to each other by blood, however, the clans in the underworld weren't like that. They were tied together with bonds thicker than blood. Even if these bonds had degraded over time because the bonds still existed, it was possible for those of higher ranking to pool their resources together. Muyang gazed at Fire Dragon Wu. The Fire Dragon clan could not be part of the 5 great clans and were very displeased with that fact. In a few words, they were just a lump of inferiority complex. It was certain that they wanted to take advantage of this chance to prove that they were superior. Unlike Fire Dragon Wu, the other 4 people seemed to be members of the 9 guilds or the 5 great clans. You bastards lower than bugs. Remember, if you stay still you'll all die. Blaze. As his spear moved, a blazing fire spread around him. Gah! My body. And in an instant 7 people were burned into ashes. What should he do? Fire Dragon Wu was overwhelming. The little monster was crazily blasting fire everywhere. However, the people who were gathered here all survived a month at a temple. It was unexpected, but they weren't taken back. Let's stick together. Let's beat this kid first and think later. The equipment they were carrying weren't that bad. Of course, it wasn't comparable to the 5 judges, but if 1,000 newcomers fought together, it was definitely possible. Some people within the group were even willing to risk their lives. Literally, those people realized on their own that they need to fight with their lives on the line. Every person realized themselves that they need to fight with their lives on the line. Although Wu was a direct descendant of the Fire Dragon clan, he was still only in his mid-20s. He couldn't be experienced in fighting against a number this big on his own. He wasn't losing the fight, but he could only be taken back as the majority of the people who he called lower than bugs were grouping up against him. Hyungnim, shouldn't we join them? Taehwan, who was behind Muyang, asked. Muyang shook his head. The 4 haven't made their move yet. The 4 judges near Wu. 2 boys, 2 girls. They haven't made their move yet. However, they wouldn't just watch Wu suffer. Even if they didn't really care for him, that didn't mean they would allow people to gossip about how a descendant of a Fire Dragon clan died in the hands of newbies, as this will lower their status as well. It was foolish to fight against the 5 judges when they were all gathered in one place. Why is he showing off? I don't feel like it. Finally, the rest of the 4 started to make their move. As expected, they weren't going to just sit and watch Wu get attacked. They looked very relaxed, as if they were all going on a walk, but as soon as they grabbed hold of their weapons, they turned into yakshas. Thump. Rumble. A transparent sword split someone apart. Some people were burned by a widespread lightning that came out of nowhere, and there was even someone who ran on all 4s like a beast. The people who acted against the judges were killed first. As the center fell apart, the rest could only follow suit. Deserters cropped up one after another. Muyang raised one of his hands. Fall back. Sith. Even the planes had an end. After walking straight for about 30 minutes, a wall blocked their path. As Muyang stretched out his hand to touch the transparent wall, he shook his head. This was probably the limit of the box of trials. Besides those 5, no one else seemed to be different. Muyang sat on a nearby rock. He carefully examined the 1,000 people, however, excluding the kids who were judges. No one else looked foreign. Although Muyang returned from the past, he still kept his unique sharp senses. It seemed unlikely that someone who could deceive Muyang's senses could be in a place like this. It's difficult to target them when the 5 are together. I need to take them on one by one. Like how Wu was in danger by acting by himself, there was a chance if he removed them one by one. Hyungnim. Are we just going to stay here and wait? Taehwan seemed a bit mad. He didn't seem satisfied in drawing back and not joining forces with the rest. In fact, it wasn't a bad idea to run away until there were 300 people left. Do you think something will change if we join the rest? How do we know if we haven't even tried? The price for recklessness is death. Not just one person but everyone here will die. Knowing how to be objectively rational was the best way to survive in the underworld. If Taehwan was skilled and strong, things might have been different, but for now it was nothing more than nonsense. Myung got up from the rock and approached Taehwan. About 100 people died over there. 900 people are scattered. It is realistically difficult to target 900 people with just 5 people. What do you think will happen next? I'm not sure. They will create and release hunting dogs. There will be some who surrender themselves to a more powerful force. The judges weren't stupid. They were young, but they were rational. They would most likely know that it would be much more efficient if they created hunting dogs and released them out to hunt. Myung walked forward. Everyone, including Taehwan, looked at him. Where are you going? This is a safe place. If you stay put, you will last until there are only 300 people left. It was a suitable area as there were many rocks to hide under. Myung thought he did what he had to do by evacuating them to a safe area. If you truly want to win, gather people who have the same goal as you. I will move by myself. Again, the position of the leader was given back to Taehwan. If the description of the trial was a free-for-all fight and if there were only 5 judges, Myung still had a chance. However, to seek that chance he needed to move alone. Fire Dragon Wu. That lump of inferiority complex wouldn't get along with the other judges. A baby monster who was away from his group. He was the perfect prey for Myung. Myung's eyes sunk in as he walked his path. As Myung said, the judges looked for hunting dogs. They knew that it was realistically hard for the 5 of them to hunt down everyone. I want to end this fast and get out of here. What is he saying, Code? His usual bad habits like always. The 3 carelessly yawned as they had their hands clasped behind their back. The girl called Code gathered up about 20 people and spoke to them as she zapped a corpse nearby. You guys are dogs. You know that as a dog you need to be loyal to your owner, right? Woof woof. If you listen well, I will specially let you guys live. I will allow you guys to be my pets. Code shot out circular electric fields from both her hands and embedded them on people's necks. This is a lightning rune. If you guys don't listen, then this will blow up and you will die. Like this. Boom. A person's neck and head blew up. It wasn't a corpse. It was a living person. Gasp. People's bodies shivered in fear. In front of them was a real monster, incomparable to the monsters they had faced in the temple. Code smiled coldly. It's not only a bad thing. The lightning rune strengthens your body. So, scatter and step on those bugs. If you don't want to die. Wow, woof woof. They desperately barked to try and stay alive somehow. Afterwards, these improvised hunting dogs went out to hunt. Behind them, the judges talked as they watched the scene. Where did Wu go? Isn't it too much to ask for him to cooperate? Let's leave Wu for now and increase our number of hunting dogs. It will be fun to watch them dispute and fight against each other. Wu was tracking down a prey by himself. While the other 4 were taking their time, he didn't stop. Stupid bastards. You will be killed for taking it easy. As a descendant of Fire Dragon clan, he had lived his life in constant competition since he was young. To become a core member in the future, he had to endure harsh training and sufferings. To Wu, the 4 looked lousy. There would be no development for those who lived their lives relaxingly as they thought they were strong. He was going to quickly end this trial and prove that he was superior. Just then, when Wu was walking in between dried-up trees, he stepped on something and numerous of daggers flew towards him. Swish. Da-da-da-da-dick. Wu quickly swung his spear and quickly rotated it to block all the daggers. Blaze. As flames fiercely lashed out, all the flying daggers dropped onto the floor. But that wasn't the end. Grah. The fire dragon on his helmet roared out loud. At the same time, a fire protective shield appeared over his body. It was the protection of the fire dragon, which alerted and protected the user when their life was at risk. Instinctively, Wu rotated his spear towards the approaching danger. Jie. But he could only hinder the swords that approached him from behind and could not block them. His shoulder was cleaved. If it wasn't for the protection of the fire dragon, he would have been seriously injured. You have sharp sense. Also, the protection of the fire dragon. A deep voice. The middle of Wu's forehead shivered slightly. Before he realized, a man was standing behind him. You bastard, what the fuck? The activation of the protection of the fire dragon meant that his life was in danger. His death was confirmed even before the sword touched him. His whole body was covered in goosebumps. His skills in setting up a trap that would immediately aim for his life. He was an expert. He definitely wasn't a beginner that could be found anywhere. However, there was no reply. Eyes layered in darkness. Wu didn't recognize his face. The man was wearing a red helmet, a fluttering red cape, and was just gently holding a sword. Muyang made a trap in the location where most of the people ran towards. He waited quietly at a location where he believed Fire Dragon Wu would pass by. Fully armed. Lunatic Sovereign's set. The effect of increasing all stats by 15 and stamina by 10 and becoming a lunatic warrior when close to death. It was better than most A-rank items combined. Information about the lunatic warrior was given below. Lunatic warrior, become enraged by the continuous consumption of stamina. 3 random stats will increase by 15. By collecting the full set, there was no consumption of stamina. It meant that he was able to ceaselessly become an enraged lunatic warrior when he received a certain amount of damage. It might have been a perfect fit for Muyang's style. From the beginning, didn't Muyang continue to fight dangerously? If he just pushed himself further to just activate the lunatic warrior, he would be able to grow stronger at a faster rate. Anyhow, Muyang wore the lunatic sovereign's set before he made his surprise attack on Wu. Honestly, he thought there was a 50-50 chance. Wu was a second generation born in the underworld. Since he was young, he had grown up with monsters, unlike the first generation who were summoned into the underworld. It was obvious that Wu was significantly more developed than Muyang's current state when they looked at the overall factors. But he still considered it a 50-50 chance because he was certain that Wu wouldn't suspect of an ambush attack. But the protection of Fire Dragon. They are really supporting him. Muyang clicked his tongue, knowing how much of a blessing it was to have that item. Descendants really were descendants. The past Muyang also dealt with the Fire Dragon clan. The one who assassinated Fire Dragon in the clan leader was Muyang. Even then it was difficult because the protection of Fire Dragon had been activated. I thought I heard somewhere that it took about a year to make an item with the protection of the Fire Dragon. A blessing that could protect your life once couldn't have been easily obtained. He could tell how much the Fire Dragon clan was supporting Wu by the amount of resources they have given him, even for a trial to kill beginners. Talk. Who sent you? The Blue Dragon clan? Maestro Guild. Wu asked with a stiff face. The tips of Muyang's lips were slightly raised. Of course, it would be hard for Wu to accept that a newbie would be able to injure him, since he would also know that the beginners have only lived in a temple for just a month. So you're not going to respond? Fine, you bastard, I won't let you die so easily. Wu rotated his spear. It changed into a different form of a spear as it started blazing with fire. Did you think you could do anything with your mere B-ranked equipment? Most of my skills and equipment are ranked. Push. Muyang made the first move. Muyang tilted anguish and smacked the head of the spear. Wu's body shuddered after sensibly blocking Muyang's attack. He never thought that Muyang would attack him before he finished what he had to say. You talk too much. Muyang put an end to the conversation. The prideful Wu was obviously pissed by Muyang interfering with what he had to say. Die. Even if his skills and equipment were good, all of Wu's movements were within Muyang's assumptions. It couldn't be helped as Wu was too young. If only he was a bit older and could be more rational. After thinking to that point, Muyang secretly laughed. Muyang remembered that Wu still had an inferiority complex even when he took over the Fire Dragon clan when Fire Dragon died. Blaze. Countless numbers of blazing spears dropped all around. Muyang avoided them all, but still his whole body was covered in soot. Rain of Fire Dragon. It had better range than I thought. Even if Muyang knew most of Wu's skills because of the overall difference in stats and skill rank, he didn't think it would be easy. If he didn't wear the Lunatic Sovereign's set, it would have been difficult. Wu mocked Muyang after casting a few more Rain of Fire Dragon on him. You little squirt. Muyang shrugged as he took out 2 talismans. The skeleton of fire and ice and the prince and his subjects. Prick, prick, screech. In an instant the undead appeared and surrounded Wu. Necromancer? Foolish. Do you think undead could survive my blaze dash? As if it was ridiculous, Wu laughed and attacked with his blazing spear. But it was completely blocked by the shield produced by the skeleton of fire and ice. Basically, the element of fire was offset by the element of water. The skeleton of fire and ice had both characteristics of fire and ice elements and wasn't bad against Wu's element. Die. Freak. The dark ghoul and 30 other ghouls joined up and followed right away. Showing both these undead meant that Muyang was certainly going to kill him. These half-dead corpses. Wu's face became completely red. He wasn't used to a situation like this where things didn't go his way. The shield created by the skeleton weakened Wu's blazing spear, and the dark ghoul and his reinforced ghouls persistently harassed Wu. Meanwhile, Muyang moved soundlessly. Free-for-all was the type of fight assassins enjoyed the most. In a fight where people couldn't tell who was who, they liked to approach them like a shadow to slit their throats. Fully piercing through their weakness. Muyang was clearly right in front of him but was outside his sight. Even if Wu had lots of great equipment and skills, he was still young and had little experience. He wouldn't have had time to learn how to face a real assassin. Gah. He barely avoided a critical injury. However, he was able to precisely deepen the wound he made earlier. As expected, he really does have sharp senses. Wu had outstanding senses in evading death. If Muyang was in his prime, this wouldn't have happened, but still it was amazing. As the same situation continuously occurred, he couldn't contain his anger and raised his spear high. I will kill you all. The cry of the fire dragon. Zithrying. The sky turned red. Blazing clouds were created and warmed the ground with hellfire. The cry of the fire dragon was a unique skill only the fire dragon clan had. However, that skill was a double-edged sword. It had monstrous destructive power, but didn't allow for the user to be safe. Cover me. Right away, Muyang ordered his undead. The ghouls hurriedly ran toward Muyang and covered his body. Thump. Blaze. Hellfire continued to drop flames onto the ground. The skeleton of fire and ice used its shield, but it was useless. The ghouls were all burnt and Muyang wasn't completely safe. Lunatic Warrior has been activated. 79, Agility 59-74, and Magic Resist 40-55. Muyang pushed the burnt-up ghouls and came out after the duration of the cry of the fire dragon had ended. With his wrecked body, Wu looked at Muyang, as if he was tired of this. Including the dark ghoul, 6 ghouls were still fine. It was sad, but the skeleton of fire and ice broke apart. Muyang clicked his tongue and grabbed hold of anguish. Was it because the lunatic warrior was active? The world seemed to be stained red and he was filled with the will to fight. He didn't feel pain even though he had an unavoidable injury. Want to fight? Want to kill? You bastard. Thump. Muyang moved. Swoosh. Push. Muyang was like a typhoon. Eek. Wu got scared after seeing how Muyang didn't die, even after pouring out everything he had. It was like the fight had already ended at that moment. Wu was unconscious. His whole body was mangled. It was amazing how he didn't die yet. It was as he planned. Muyang was barely able to not kill Wu. He had to force himself to withstand the strong murderous intent he had while in the lunatic warrior state. Muyang's endurance wasn't that weak to give in to such desires. Creating with a living corpse. A living corpse. Muyang was planning to make Wu into an undead when he was still half alive. It was never done before, but he believed it was worth a try. If he could turn Wu into an undead when he was still half alive, it would be very useful for Muyang. The box of trials could be tricked. Muyang had a complete understanding of the weakness of the box of trials. Unlike the normal trials, the box of trials allowed people to set up their own trials and rewards. Of course, they lacked in detail. If Wu, who was a living corpse, killed the other 4 judges, the reward would go to Wu and not Muyang. Muyang could then hide his identity and still get the reward. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Wu was currently still on the boundaries of death. Could he possibly make an undead with Wu in this state? After removing Wu's status viewer from his wrist, Muyang quickly scanned his history. Nothing much is here. Simply, Wu walked a path that someone else laid out for him and mistakenly believed that he had built up his own path. Like father, like son. He had a complete inferiority complex, only overestimating himself and didn't realize the reality. This crooked personality was similar to Fire Dragon. Therefore, there wasn't much he could learn from his history. Inevitably, Muyang activated his Art of Death skill. Soon a dark aura touched Wu's body. Plus incredible equipped state. All stats will increase by 10. Plus high tolerance to fire. Plus high tolerance to light. Plus following skills are available: Rain of Fire, Cry of Fire and Spear of Fire. Plus able to detect danger. Plus half alive, doesn't rot. Muyang was quite surprised by the stats of the newly created undead. He knew that the basic stats were going to be better than his. Muyang would have lost if he couldn't read Wu's movements or know about his skills. But he was completed without much of a loss compared to when he was alive. Normally, it was rare for the skills or stats to be transferred over when a necromancer made an undead. It was only possible with materials like the Death Knight to make something similar. The Death Knight. A top-ranking undead. It was an entity that had attained death and was simply a powerful knight without a match. However, there was a limit in finding materials like the Death Knight. Maybe they had to be at least a leader of a large guild or clan. If you could make one, you could be fearless against an army of over 10,000. Of course, Wu's material fell short by a lot compared to that. It seemed like it was a result of a high art score and an increased rank in the Art of Death skill. Soul Exploitation? What was more, a new skill was created. A name he had not heard of before. Just when Muyang was feeling strange. Swoosh. Wu's injuries were rapidly recovering and his body was slowly raised. A bright light appeared above on top. Was it because he turned into a blazing spear soldier? However, the bright light was floating above other undead as well. It's the effect of the skill. He thought he was seeing the lights because of the soul exploitation skill. Muyang immediately turned his status viewer and read his newly acquired skill. Skill name: Soul Exploitation F. Description: Absorb undead with an art score above 70 to increase your stats. There is a very low possibility of obtaining one of the skills the undead possessed. The efficiency varies depending on the art score, skill rank and the material of the undead. Muyang's eyebrows twitched slightly. He wasn't this surprised when he created the blazing spear soldier. Fire Dragon Wu could be classified as a top-ranked material, but due to the property of the undead he wouldn't get stronger. Unless it was strengthened by the necromancer personally using his magic or through equipment or fusion. Although it couldn't be said that all undead couldn't develop, it was very rare. So eventually there would be a time when the undead would be discarded, and when that time came Muyang could use this skill. I could even gain their skill. Muyang concentrated on the last part of the description. Even though the possibility was low, there was a chance to obtain one of the skills the undead possessed. That meant, if he was to create someone with a really good skill, he could cast soul exploitation to obtain that skill. Although that was only when that low possibility worked to his favor. However, once he cast the spell, the undead would become useless. This skill seemed to be best used when the undead was about to be discarded. The Skeleton of Fire and Ice. Muyang raised his head. The half-collapsed skeleton of fire and ice had its head completely lowered next to him. But there definitely was a bright light hovering above it. It meant it was possible to use soul exploitation. The light started to slowly dim and it looked like after a period of time he could no longer use it. Soul exploitation. Muyang approached the skeleton and cast the skill. Soon a blue light appeared out of Muyang's hand and stole the light above the skeleton's head. It is a work of art with an art score of 71. After examining the material and the skill rank, you have exploited 4% of its stats. The Skeleton of Fire and Ice has a total of 187 stats. 7 of the stats will be randomly distributed to your stats. Strength +1, Agility +2, Intelligence +1, Fighting Aura +1, Magic Resistance +2. Sadly, he wasn't able to obtain a skill. Well, it would have been weird if he was easily able to obtain a skill when it said the possibility was low. The fact that the skill used the total amount of stats as the standard drew his attention. There were many cases where the undead made with top-quality materials would develop multiple stats. If Muyang was to use this skill on those undead, he would be able to gain more stats with the same effect. My stamina is recovered. Another thing. He could feel his body getting stronger through his skin. However, there was another effect. The wounds inflicted during the fight with Fire Dragon Wu healed at a visible rate. Looks like the soul exploitation skill can even heal my wounds. Muyang slowly nodded his head. The skill he obtained after ranking the Art of Death skill to C rank, it could be incredibly useful depending on how he used it. He was positive that his skills were 1 or 2 levels above a normal necromancer at the very least. As his movements became more natural, Muyang turned his status viewer to see his increased stats. Achievement effect dashed Gremry's Anguish, A, +3 to all abilities. Class effect dash Death Lord, Lord class Ruler of Death. Sets dash. Strength 67 41 plus 26. Agility 61 43 plus 18. Stamina 67 39 plus 28. Intelligence 36 18 plus 18. Wisdom 35 17 plus 18. Fighting Aura 42 24 plus 18. Magic Resistance 30 12 plus 18. Special note. Fighting Aura has been awakened. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength +5. Herculean Strength Leather Armor, Strength +3. Lunatic Sovereign's Set. All stats +15, Stamina +10. My basic stats have increased. Magic resistance as well. Normally, stats increased by skills or equipment were considered support stats. Curse-type skills would usually reduce the support stats by a percentage, and if people went into high-ranked anti-magic fields, they would not receive an increase of stats from skills. However, there was no problem if his basic stats increased. On top of that, magic resistance was a stat he wasn't even able to increase by 1 until now. Although he did develop the stat, methods to increase it were almost non-existent. Usually, it could only be raised with the help of equipment or an achievement, but now there was a way to increase it without difficulty. The strong who placed at the top would normally pay a lot of attention to magic resistance. Due to the characteristic of the underworld, they didn't know who would use what skill to threaten them. No matter how strong you were, if you were careless you would die. It was because of this, Muyang was able to successfully complete his assassination against someone with a large difference in stats. While he rubbed his chin, thinking about something momentarily, the blazing spear soldier regained his original appearance. Master. Muyang glanced towards the blazing spear soldier. You can talk. Please give me orders. Was it because he was only half dead? Or was it because he had more intelligence and wisdom than his other undead? Muyang couldn't help but ask. Do you have any memories of when you were alive? I only remember a little. Muyang crossed his arms. His intelligence was enough, but his memories weren't completely intact. If he still retained his memories, it would have been a big help in dealing with the other 4 judges, but the problem was his memories were too ambiguous. If they found out that he was an undead, Muyang would lose his blazing spear soldier and arouse their attention. I can use him. However, it wasn't like all paths were blocked. Muyang started to design a small plan. A story that could be used even outside the box of trials. A method that could keep suspicions at a minimum while gaining all the profit. You will act like Fire Dragon Wu from now on. Do you at least remember his way of speech? I remember. I will do as you command. Although he did pause his words, it was enough. Muyang put everything in order and moved out without any hesitation. Taehwan had to choose. To be satisfied or go out. As a leader, he had tremendous responsibilities. His decision could decide whether more than 10 people lived or died. Was staying here really safe? Rocky formations. It was an ideal place to hide. However, they had no way of knowing when there will only be 300 remaining. And he didn't feel like hiding either. If they used the death of others as a stepping stone for survival, it was certain that they would continue to use it. The first time was hard, from the second it was easy. I can't assume everyone besides the judges are on the same side. Muyang had told them that there would be some who would submit to their power. And if they had endured a month in a temple like them, there was no way of knowing for sure they were nice people. He said if we want to win we have to combine our strength. Muyang would never say anything that was impossible. If Muyang mentioned winning, it meant that the possibility of winning wasn't zero. The result would change depending on their actions. That was what Taehwan thought. I am gathering those that are willing to fight against the judges. It is dangerous, so I won't force you. I hope that those who are willing will follow me. Taehwan would always respectfully state his opinion. He believed that he couldn't force anyone to follow when it would lead to a deadly situation. Of course, everyone could only try to read what was on each other's minds. They would be safe if they stayed hidden, so would there really be people who would risk their lives? I'll go with you. It's not like we're 100% safe staying here either, right? If that's the case, it's better to make a last-ditch effort. Kongbek's. He was the man who Taehwan had been through the Star of David and 2 boss battles with. Although he was a bit sleazy, he was someone he could trust. Kim Taehwan and Kong Baeksu were the real big shots of the temple. If those two both left at once, there would be too big of a gap. As Baeksu acted, the atmosphere slowly started to change. Finally, 7 people including Bae Suzy gathered and Taehwan didn't scold the rest. I can't force their decision. Let's try to change the progression of the battle with these 7 people. Taehwan left the rocky formations with a heavy heart. Although they started with vigor, it wasn't easy to find people. Even when they did, people didn't want to follow Taehwan. Only 7 people. There wasn't anyone who would believe in a group with a child and wounded people. They just couldn't understand. The force displayed by the judges were beyond their imaginations. At that time, it did look like they were going to gather their forces to attack. But once they felt the difference between them, they all lowered their tails. In reality, the people's reactions were all the same. Why would I take that risk? When I could hide and wait for it to drop to 300 people. Can't I just leave then? How can I believe you enough to follow you? How are you going to do something with 7 people when we couldn't do anything with 1,000? It'd be a relief we all died a dog's death. They were right. Didn't Taehwan just barely resist that temptation? Cowardly bastards. Baeksu ground his teeth. It's because I'm not good enough. However, the first thing Taehwan felt was remorse. It was because he wasn't able to get people to trust him. Maybe if he had the same strength as Muyang, it might have gone differently. He would have been able to lead the crowd with his overwhelming charisma. Taehwan still didn't give up. If he could just increase the numbers, it would also increase their strength. He wholeheartedly believed that there was someone out there with the same thoughts as him. However, the hunting dogs were a problem. Those who submitted to power had spotted the group of 7 and started their attack. Sheet. Baeksu raised his dagger. The number of hunting dogs was well above 20. Just why are you doing this, you damn bastards? Baeksu suddenly shouted. The situation really wasn't great. A bloodbath. It was to the point where Taehwan was just barely able to block the front. However, the enemies were frantic. You guys need to die for us to live. I don't want to die. They acted like if they didn't kill they would be the ones to die. There was no way they could start a conversation in a situation like this. So the only way for them to live was to kill their enemies. And the side to die had been decided. Is this the end? Taehwan felt the sky turn yellow. It might have been best just to hide in between the rocks. And it looked like people were going to die because of his reckless bravado. I have to let at least a person escape. He felt responsible. Taehwan was willing to die. Hua! He pushed the hunting dogs away with his shield of eradication to force a path. However, no matter how many dogs he pushed away, more would come and take their place. Please, please. Taehwan gritted his teeth. Even when he received a wound or a deep slash, he wasn't fazed. Strength poured in. The shape of the shield changed. But it was inadequate. If he didn't kill everyone, he would not be able to leave this place. It didn't matter if he was willing to die or if he obtained a unique class. The current Taehwan was unable to handle the strength of the masses. The shadow of despair covered everyone's face. At that moment, they instinctively realized that there was no way out and that their deaths were approaching. Fwaish. But a red spear flew down from afar. The hunting dog's head, which was hit by the spear, exploded like a firework. And as if it was planned, everyone's movements stopped. At the same time, Taehwan mumbled after looking to the direction the spear flew from. Fire Dragon Wu? Hyung Nim. The judge Fire Dragon Wu. He was calming walking towards them. What was more surprising was that the man next to Wu was Myung. And more than 100 people were trailing behind them. The hunting dogs could only panic. Why would a judge? The judges were the ones who made them into hunting dogs. They were the ones who forcefully attached the lightning runes and ordered them to hunt, so why was a judge attacking them? But Wu was only expressionless. When he stretched out his hand, the blazing spear returned to him. Afterwards, without any mercy, he started to hunt. Why on earth? Gayak. Wu could not be stopped with only 20 hunting dogs. As soon as the 100 people behind him joined up with them, the situation was quickly resolved. Taehwan just gawked at the scene. His head wasn't able to process the situation fast enough. He could only recover his senses after Myung approached him. Hyung Nim. How did this happen? Why did you leave the rocky area? Taehwan gulped his saliva as Myung asked instead of replying. Hup. He felt choked. He thought he was being scolded by being asked what he had accomplished while Myung had finished his preparations. Truthfully, Taehwan didn't do anything besides driving his comrades into danger. Nothing. There was a common saying that it is better to remain silent than risk being thought as a fool. Taehwan was the latter. Guess he was weak. He just acted with reckless bravado. I didn't want to just hide. I guess it's in your nature. Myung chuckled as he turned around. Myung believed he needed to slightly adjust his thoughts about Taehwan. If there are people who change, there should be others who don't. The people who were praised as true heroes like the Dragon Lord, all were strong-spirited in nature. What is a hero? People who cannot let injustice pass by even if they knew that the situation was hopeless. Therefore most lived a short life. But if they were to survive, they would leave a mark in this world. He became stronger. And Taehwan became stronger. With a glance, Myung could tell that Taehwan had changed. When he saw that the shape of his shield had changed, he realized that it probably had a secret option. He didn't seem like a fool who simply followed his will. Probably. When people talk about what qualities a hero possessed, they were probably referring to people like Taehwan. The problem was surviving, and that was solely Taehwan's responsibility. Myung couldn't do anything in that area. It was probably only possible for him to push his back a little. They were worth being respected. Myung thought of the heroes he had killed with his hands. At least they weren't like the monsters that moved for their selfish motives whom Myung loathed. They were upright in their beliefs. The problem was that they made up only a few people and most were hostile towards them. A lot of things could have been different if they didn't die by those monsters who used the forest of death to do their work. At least it wouldn't have hopelessly collapsed like that. The reason why Myung aimed for an absolute power that no one had ever achieved was because he felt it was meaningless to fight with them. He wanted to give off the impression that if they messed with him, everything would be destroyed and use that to stop them in advance. The underworld was a world where the winner gets all. If he stepped on them so that even the new sprouts couldn't shoot up, no one would attempt to crawl all over him. Therefore it was true that he had positive feelings towards Taehwan, who had the qualities of a true hero. At first he was negative towards him, but after seeing how his actions, his perspective had changed. Myung spoke quietly. Follow me. Desperately learn and master with your eyes and movements. After you become strong, you won't need to hide any longer. Myung only had one goal. Using Fire Dragon Wu to rally up people and have a real, free-for-all, fight. The 4 judges could not be handled by just Wu and Myung. However, things would change if hundreds of people were gathered. The judges would falter thinking that Wu betrayed them and he was going to squeeze in through that gap. Also, Myung knew who the first person to let their guard down would be. Code. One of the judges, second daughter of the Lawless clan. She was engaged with Wu. For the Fire Dragon clan, the engagement was supposed to be the footsteps towards becoming part of the 5 great clans. And to progress their relationship, the two were placed in the same trial. However, Wu had already become an undead. Myung could hide in the shadows and attain the reward when Wu kills Code by exploiting the flaws of the box of trials. It was highly likely that they were trying to make their rising stars more competitive and stronger. They would have had to include terms if a judge killed another. And it wouldn't have been a petty reward either. After all, the 5 great clans and the 9 guilds are all competitive with each other. It was obvious what kind of trial they have set for the box of trials. Was someone killed by Wu? There could be an uproar, but that was it. On the contrary, the Fire Dragon clan might be happy about it, as Wu would have demonstrated enough power for the Fire Dragon clan to be well known throughout the underworld. Of course, they couldn't just be happy about it. Wu will disappear. However, he couldn't just let Wu go after everything was complete. Even if he was half dead, he was still an undead. There will be some who would recognize him, and Muyang's identity would be revealed. He needed to design a meticulous plan that would certainly work. Zap. Zap. Then a lightning storm raged from afar. Within the lightning storm, a figure flew towards them. And below, people who had lost their will followed one after another. It was the person who had placed lightning runes on people and turned them into hunting dogs. You traitor! You even dare to turn your back on me. Code had appeared. Code's appearance was faster than Muyang had imagined. However, the other 3 judges hadn't appeared. They might not have wanted to get involved in a love quarrel. They were strengthened. Muyang's gaze was focused on the hunting dogs Code had brought with her. As if they were drunk, their eyes seemed out of focus, and as if their muscles expanded, their bodies had become larger. About 50 people. While Muyang led a number a bit over 150. Even though there was a definite difference in numbers, there was no way to guarantee a win. Gaga. Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? Are you crazy? Code's face turned red as she raged at him. As they were already engaged, they called each other differently. However, Wu's expression didn't change. So you're not going to speak? You want to hang around with these bugs instead of us, right? Then I will kill you all. It's not like your Fire Dragon clan can do anything against my lawless clan. Attack. An undead could be ordered through his consciousness. Wu grabbed hold of his blazing spear and swung it around. Swoosh. He moved without the slightest hesitation. Zup. The spear brushed against Code's neck. He wanted to finish her off in one shot when her guard was down, but it only left a scratch. A layer of lightning around her acted as a shield. You tried to attack me? You dare attack me? Me. Splat. A wide shockwave of lightning spread out from Code's entire body. The ground shook and it was hard to even approach her. If you just looked at their stats, Code was a level higher than Wu. However, Wu became stronger as he became an undead. First, the fact that he no longer feared death was a very big factor. Use Rain of Fire. Wu, the blazing spear soldier, moved as he heard Muyang's order. As he courageously stepped in the shockwave made of lightning, he produced his blazing spear and pierced it multiple times. Meanwhile, Muyang never forgot to look around. Taehuan. You lead the rest of the people. Taehuan's eyes widened. You mean me? You are the 3rd strongest person here. You can have some confidence. 3rd. Taehuan nodded as if he thought it was quite the compliment. I understand. A fight had started, the hunting dogs against the humans. Remove the core of the electric shield. Meanwhile, Muyang focused on ordering the blazing spear soldier. He wasn't used to these types of fights, but Muyang was still able to think a few moves ahead. If he could recognize the opponent's movements ahead of time and ordered him accordingly, that was enough. Through the blazing spear soldier, Muyang was able to move in a way his current body couldn't. The core of the electric shield. As he stopped the path that the lightning flowed through, the raging lightning calmed noticeably. You're just making a last frantic attempt. Gaga won't be able to win against me. You should know well yourself. Hanging around with a bunch of bugs, did you forget your position? Then I'll teach you again properly. Code was also part of the inferiority complex Wu had. Wu always had his tail between his legs as Code was one of the geniuses of the lawless clan. However, Wu knew that if they just looked at their strength, Wu was comparable to Code. That he was never able to pass over his own limits due to the surrounding pressure and his inferiority complex. As he was able to borrow Muyang's eyes, he was not the same as he used to be. If he was stuck, he would force his way through. Yow! The soldier slammed the ground as he quickly jumped up. The soldier moved as though it was one with Muyang. As the two slowly blended, it was no different than Muyang moving on his own body. I want to win. Muyang could also hear the cry of Wu's soul. This was how Mu-young could understand how great of an inferiority complex he had against Code, the person who was supposed to become his closest. Mu-young could read the flow of the lightning. Since the lightning flowed in a single direction, it wasn't impossible to reach Code if they moved to the side. Code trembled as he slowly moved closer. How? He tossed the flowing lightning aside with his spear. The fire spread apart and neutralized the lightning. The flow of the fight had changed. Mu-young wasn't to give back the momentum he had attained. Wasn't Mu-young the type who would never let go after grabbing hold of a chance to win? Code raised her hand to create lightning and continuously tried to attack him, but they were unable to reach him. Lies. There is no way Gaga could destroy my lightning. Even that bias showed that she had already let her guard down. Letting one's guard down would result in a loss. Also, Code had never lost in her life. She was weak in these situations. Soon, the blazing spear soldier stood right in front of her as he passed through the lightning. An emotionless face. Because of it, she was more afraid. After seeing him like that, Code could only tense up. You aren't going to kill me, right? You wouldn't kill me. I will take back what I said before. The soldier raised his spear high in the air. There wasn't even a second of hesitation. The spear pierced through Code's neck. At the same time, a long message appeared on top of his status viewer. Code's body was lying on the cold floor. However, this wasn't the end. The people who were strengthened by the lightning runes started to go wild. After watching the scene, Mu-young just turned his head. Taehwan needs experience. Taehwan was still a rookie. But he had the qualities to become a hero. Only through rough experiences would his potential fully bloom. In the very least, the so-called heroes Mu-young had seen weren't the type who needed help from others and had to overcome numerous trials on their own to raise the voices. And it was the perfect situation for Taehwan to gain experience. If Mu-young was to engage now, Taehwan would lose this chance. Soulmate. Mu-young completely moved his attention to the reward he received. He turned his status viewer and looked carefully at the newly appeared sentence. Soulmate B+. When you have a high assimilation with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase. Soulmate. It seemed as though using Blazing Spear Soldier to kill Code made it possible. In reality, all of the Blazing Spear Soldier's stats were increased by 2. That wasn't all. Piece of the Earth Dragon's skin. Materials from dragons were very rare. A green piece of skin appeared on top of the soldier's hands. The amount was small as it could fit in 2 hands, but even if it appeared that way, it was still a high-grade material. It was particularly difficult to find a dragon's skin. It was because a dragon didn't leave any trace of their shed skin. And among the various skins, the Earth Dragon's skin had exceptional magic conductivity. There was less chance of a leakage in magic power when a material with high magic conductivity was used to make an equipment. Since there was also a high chance to amplify the magic, receiving the Earth Dragon's skin was better than most rewards. Mu-young pondered for a moment and placed the piece inside the infinity pouch. There was no need for it right now, but later in the future, there were a lot of ways this material could be useful. Headley's cow. It might be nice if I get the heart of the phoenix and use it together. Making an equipment with the heart of the phoenix and the Earth Dragon's skin? It would depend on the blacksmith skills, but whatever he makes, it will at least be an A++ rank equipment. It was enjoyable just by thinking about it. For it to be higher than an S rank, he needed a blacksmith recognized as legendary, but he already had some thoughts about that. Anyhow, Mu-young looked at Code's body lying on the floor. What should I do? First, using the flaws of the box of trials was successful. It has been confirmed that Code was killed under Wu's name. The rest of the judges will know this truth by now. As Wu wasn't considered dead, sufficient conditions weren't met to leave this area alive. It was because he was made into an undead when he was on the boundaries of death. Indeed, if they thought Wu was dead, there was no way he could receive such a reward. How he was going to use Code was the problem. It was the best evidence to make Wu the killer. If he left it alone, people will believe that Wu was the killer and he will be solely responsible for the crime. But it still seemed unfortunate. Mu-young believed that Code's material was worth more than the other judges. She even had a story. It was really a waste to dispose of her story with Wu. I must hide it. There was no need for a lot of evidence. The corpses of the rest of the judges were enough evidence for others to see. While everyone else was busy looking elsewhere, he used the art of death skill. A black aura emitted out and wrapped around Code's dead body. Plus lightning rune, can strengthen up to 30 by planting them. Plus rune explosion of the one with the lightning rune. Plus lightning storm, nailing down Sky's spear skill is usable. Plus love-hate. If blazing spear soldier and sorcerer of lightning are summoned together, all of their stats will increase by 3. Myung nodded in satisfaction. Love-hate, it was outstanding for a buff. Indeed, the art of death skill certainly relied on the story of the undead. It was newly found information that relationships before their deaths had an effect. Lightning runes could be used on the prince and his subjects. It didn't seem like a bad idea in making Code into an undead. An amazing scene could be pictured if lightning runes were placed on the 30 ghouls summoned by Prince and his subjects, and if they all exploded. Right away, Myung made the Sorceress of Lightning into a talisman and placed her inside his infinity pouch. Even though the corpse disappeared into thin air, it was an incredibly intense battle. It wasn't odd to find the body disappear without a trace. Afterward, when he turned his head, he found that the fight was slowly coming to a stop. The faces of the 3 judges wrinkled. Wu killed Code. He's crazy. Well, he was naturally not a normal person. But it will only be his last frantic attempt. What could he do with a bunch of beginners? Unlike their disregarding tone, they seemed a bit nervous. They were completely unaware that Wu was turned into an undead when he was still alive. By the way, why would Wu hang around with those bugs? Isn't it because he is the child of the Shallow Fire Dragon clan? But if Wu turned against us, it would be dangerous for us to move alone. How do you want to do this? Even if they were overflowing with bravado, they weren't going to be reckless about it. Unlike Wu, they were members of the 5 great clans. It was the same for Code, but if Code had died, it was necessary for them to be cautious. I don't like the fact that we all have to act together to fight against someone like Wu, but it can't be helped since he was the one to ruin our plan in the first place. We need to teach him why the 5 great clans are known as the 5 great clans. It wasn't like they were in a good relationship with Wu in the first place. Originally, they didn't acknowledge people other than the 5 great clans. Since it was going to be annoying if they were to annoy him, and because he was engaged to Code, they decided to let him pass. However, things were different if Wu killed Code. If they were to just withdraw here, it will only confirm that they were scared of the Fire Dragon clan and Fire Dragon Wu. Accuse Wu of the crime outside of the box of trials? Don't. There were many others who could take their place. There was no way the clans would peacefully accept them once they dishonored the clan's face. They should be glad if they weren't disposed. They couldn't just be soft on them as they have until now. Wu. We will definitely kill you. Now even for them it was a matter of survival. Gradually the numbers increased. At first many people were unsure if Wu really did betray the others, but after Wu killed one of the other judges, Code, their thoughts about him completely changed. After the appearance of the message about Code's death, people started to come out one by one. After placing Taehwan and Blazing Spear Soldier on the front lines, Myung was preparing something from behind. Kicking. The Emperor of Shrew Mice popped out from the ground. He was very active and was double the size he was in the beginning. King, where did you come back from? Susie, who was beside it, tilted her head. King's body was covered in dirt. As if it was tired, he came out of the ground and lied down with his belly out. Susie talked as she poked its belly. Mister, why is King like this? Well, I'm not sure. Myung denied he knew anything about it and just walked down the road. It wasn't that big of a deal. He was just making a few preparations for the fight. Susie lifted up the droopy King by its neck. Are you a mole? Why did you dig your way out here? Who? As they waited motionlessly at a designated location, the rest of the 3 judges appeared. Even from the beginning they looked at the Blazing Spear Soldier Fire Dragon Wu, with eyes filled with murderous intent. You crazy bastard. Did it feel good after killing your fiancé? You don't think you could win against us by combining forces with these bugs, right? Just give up trying to leave here alive. They all said something, but Wu did not reply. He just stood there quietly. Since the beginning, as Mu Young was controlling him, it could be said that it was obvious. The soldier had intelligence, but he lagged a bit when he spoke. So others would always be able to tell that something was weird when he spoke. As if they accepted his silence as him ignoring them, the judges grinded their teeth. Hyung Nim. Isn't it better to just attack first? Taehwan asked for Mu Young's opinion. However, Mu Young shook his head. Just watch them from afar. Yes. Wu will handle them on his own. Would that be possible? I know that he is strong, but they are also judges. Taehwan was correct. He didn't see it wrong. Even if Wu was strong, the three were also strong. Unless if it was 1 versus 1. There was no chance if it was 1 versus 3. But Mu Young just looked coldly at the fight scene. Go. Thump. The blazing spear soldier stepped forward. I will kill you guys. One sentence. That was enough. As he took the first step on the open field, everyone's gaze was on him. There were about 400 people who were gathered here. If they fought together, there was hope. However, only the soldier moved. At that moment, when everyone was nervously watching them. You foolish bastard. Are you saying that you're going to fight us alone? The judge who was standing in front went down on all fours. An aura of a beast emitted from all over his body. As the rising star from one of the 5 great clans, Beast Clan, who was able to control the strength of a beast. There was a saying that no one could catch up with their strength or agility. Behind him, the other 2 also joined. Cry of fire. The soldier lifted his spear high in the air. From the beginning, he was planning to use his best skill. The widespread and destructive skill that was even dangerous to the user. Thump. Thump. In an instant, the sky turned red and blazing hail started to rain down. The ground exploded and places were being destroyed. You can't hit me with that sheet. However, the judge who was in the shape of a beast was able to avoid the fierce blazing hail. Instantly, he was closing the distance between them. The other 2 were slow but were still getting closer while blocking the hail. If it kept on like this, he would be allowing them to attack. But the tips of Mu Young's lips subtly went up. Crash. With the soldier in the center, the ground started to sink. What is this? The judges seemed quite taken back. Are you going to commit suicide? The man who had the appearance of beast urgently yelled, but Wu was still unresponsive. Instead, he raised his spear and stopped the judge's movements. He was already half dead, there was no reason for him to fear death. In the end, the judges were destined to sink down as their movements were stopped by the soldier. If they forced their way out, they would be exposed to the cry of fire. The cry of fire was an intense and widespread skill that was even dangerous to its user. The 400-some-odd people were carried away by the scene and looked with their mouths open. Witnesses. Mu Young crossed his arms. He basically gathered the people so that he could increase the number of witnesses. To show that Fire Dragon Wu fought against the rest of the judges. The reason why the ground started to suddenly sink was all calculated by his plan. I meddled with the core of the box of trials. He found the core of the box of trials by using King, the Emperor of Shroom-Ice. Mu Young believed that there was a core, which constructed and maintained the box of trials buried somewhere underground. As the area where the core was buried sucked in magic, it was highly likely for the top layer to be weak. And honestly, he thought it had a 50-50 chance of finding it. Since he believed he was near the great city, he made King look around for it. The results were successful. Since he found out the location of the core, all that was left was to properly shake it. It was the reason why he used the soldier's strongest skill from the beginning. Order them. To stop the ones who are coming up. Yes. After Mu Young spoke, Taehwan asked again. Mu Young just stood there with a cold face. Almost there. However, they couldn't look down on their physical stats. Even though the soldier was stopping them, there was still a chance they would crawl up before they were completely buried. As if Taehwan understood Mu Young, he nodded and went forward. Surround the area and don't allow them to crawl up. If you have ranged weapons or skills, use them and try to stop their path. There was a fixed range of area where the cry of fire could rain down on. If you just surround the area and stop them, even if they were judges, they couldn't easily crawl out. Accomplices. This way the 400 people could be considered accomplices. You bug-like bastards. The man who had a beast-like form grinded his teeth as he stepped on the collapsing ground while trying to escape. However, he was too late to crawl out of it. He tried to crawl up somehow by avoiding the pouring cry of fire and the various of skills people used, but he wasn't successful in finding a gap. Thump. During that time the wide area collapsed. Like a black hole. Even the place with the core was buried. The indiscriminate pour of the cry of fire had stopped. Shortly after, messages popped up. The fight inside the box of trials had ended. Shortly after, messages popped up. The fight inside the box of trials had ended. Crush. The ground shook and soon the air started to split. Muyang knew right away that the area where a light was leaking out was the exit. However, Muyang looked down at the collapsed ground for a moment before he heading towards that direction. It seems like it would be hard to salvage them. Myung summoned the blazing spear soldier back into a talisman right after reading the message that Wu had killed the rest of the judges. Possibly due to the characteristics of the undead or because he recalled the soldier before he was completely buried, it didn't seem like he was completely destroyed to the point beyond recovery. However, the other 3 judges were different. Their bodies would have been completely destroyed. Even if the rescue team searched for them, they would probably only find some remains of the corpses. Clang. He scratched his cheek after tossing a rock down the large hole. It didn't seem possible for him to go down alone since it was at least a few hundred meters deep. 3 rewards. He took his mind off the matter and thought of the rewards he received. One of the rewards was the secret medicine of the sage. It was a rare medicine that would randomly enhance a single stat. There wasn't a downside in enhancing a lot of stats. The other 2 were Night Crystal and Fairy's Wing Powder. Although they weren't as great as the secret medicine of the sage or the piece of the earth dragon's skin, they were still quite useful. What is that? A light? If we follow the light, does it lead us to a safe area? People could only be confused when a light appeared once the fight ended. As Muyang started to slowly walk, Taehwan quickly took the lead and settled the people down. First, let's all gather. Let's find and gather up the people who aren't here right now and leave this place altogether. A total of 650 people. More than double the number had survived, a lot more than the conditions to survive. The gazes directed at the people who hid weren't great, but the pleasant feeling that they had finished the trial and survived was much greater. Naturally, they relaxed their hearts and their guard against each other went down. Kid. You fought well in a place like this, huh? I'm not a kid, but my name is Bae Suzy. Haha. Sure, kid. Ah damn. I told you I'm not a kid. Ha ha ha. People started to gather around Suzy. They were amazed that a young girl had survived until now, but it was also because of the characteristics of the Valkyrie of Dawn. Her real father. He just lowered his head from afar. In all honesty, he would have died more than 10 times already if Taehwan and the rest didn't accommodate him. People didn't say much because Suzy did about 1.5 times the work of others, but it seems like he had a lot more on his mind. The thought that his existence was rather holding Suzy back. He started to understand more and more about how power was more important than affection in this world. Suzy's father approached Muyang. Muyang was looking past the light with a stiff face before he turned his head. Can I talk to you for a moment? He unenthusiastically nodded. Speak. Is there any way for me to get stronger? At least, to the point where I won't hold my daughter back. Do you want to get stronger? He stole a glance at Suzy laughing and talking with the others. Yes. If it goes on like this, I would only be a large baggage to her. That kid is strong and bright. She never complained while she was growing up. Even when I was fired from my job and when my wife and I divorced, she was the only one who patted my back. Myung just coldly gazed at him. Suzy's father sorrowfully continued his words. I can't die now. Until she can be completely independent. Even right now, I'm aware that I'm holding her back. But if I die now, I know that she won't be able to bear it. Since her sense of responsibility is strong, I know she is forcing herself, but in reality she is more soft-hearted than anyone else. So please, tell me a way I can get stronger. He seemed desperate. He looked as though he thought about it tens and hundreds of times and became even more discouraged before approaching Muyang. Muyang thought about the time when his 2 arms were cut off. Only 3 received medicine as a reward for hunting. Out of the 3, Taehwan gave his medicine to him and was able to avoid death. However, it would have been impossible if he didn't have a strong will to live. There is no way for a crippled person to get stronger. Myung bluntly spoke. Could you imagine an armless soldier? Most skills couldn't be even used without arms. Even if there was a possibility, they could only dream of moving skillfully. Others would think it was basically a miracle for him to survive until now. But that luck wouldn't work in the underworld. Thump. Susie's father kneeled. Myung frowned. I will do anything. When I die, I will let you have my body. I don't want much. I just want to know a way. If you could just let me know of a way, that is enough. He was willing to give up his dead body. He seemed determined. For a moment, Myung wiped his chin. Story. If nothing else, his story seemed magnificent. The material wasn't that great, but didn't the art of death skill place more importance on the story? However, no matter how much he thought about it, an armless undead made from a normal human body didn't seem very useful. It was at that moment. 40. This never happened before, probably because no one had ever clung on to him this desperately, but Myung was very interested. Making a contract with me by using his life as collateral. In return, he needed to help him achieve his goal. This is no different than a devil's contract. Myung secretly laughed. If you looked at the content, there was nothing weird about calling it a devil's contract. Death using their soul as collateral to fulfill their wish. There is nothing better than making materials better. His story was amazing. Therefore, if they were to make a contract of death, there was no need to think about it. After thinking that far, he thought of an idea which he didn't think of in the beginning. Even if the possibilities were low, it wasn't like there was no way for Susie's father to become stronger. Rather, wasn't it better to break through that low possibility and fulfill his goal of getting stronger? If you really desire a way, I will let you know. It might be helpful depending on how hard you try. Thank you. Thank you. Even though it wasn't something he should really be happy about, maybe it was because he didn't understand the meaning properly that he cried in rejoice. Right after, a dot had appeared on top of his forehead. Myung could only be a bit doubtful. As it never told him how he was going to be notified when the subject died or how he was going to retrieve the body. Since they said by authority it couldn't be a sham. 40. The top 10 humans would have at least one power that could be called an authority. Myung trusted the value of that name. Afterwards, he spoke into Susie's father's ears as if he was whispering. If you pass through that light, soon you will arrive at a location. From there, find a book called The Study of the Darkness Spirit. The Sky Library could only be used once by every person. The people who enter could choose and learn its skill. The problem was there was a massive number of skills, and for high-ranked skills, it was set up that they had to pass a few trials to earn them. And among them, the Study of the Darkness Spirit was a considerably high-ranked skill. Even in the underworld, there weren't a lot of people who could control the spirits. And in reality, even if they had learned the skill, if they didn't have the expertise, they weren't able to make a contract with a spirit. It was like a gamble. Normally, liches would learn the Study of the Darkness Spirit, but this was the only way for a cripple like him could get stronger. If he succeeded, his story would become more impressive. He had something to protect, and to do that he would need to desperately devote himself towards his goal. Even if he died without getting stronger, it wasn't a loss. Instead, if he was to overcome all trials, there was no reason not to acknowledge him. Not bad. That was right. It wasn't bad at all. He passed through the light and saw an enormous arena. 650 people, including Myung, were standing in front of a black door in a place that was like an arena with no ceiling. Besides that, there were about 20 black doors, and a minimum of 300 to a maximum of 400 people were lined up in front of each door. Most faces looked very pale and were grinding their teeth. Especially, there were girls and boys who looked to be judges that were part of the groups. However, the people who greeted them were at least 10 times their number. An enormous number of people were on top of the arena stairs and were all looking down at them. As if they were looking at monkeys at a zoo. 9 guilds, 5 great clans. And the rest. Myung instantly recognized them. Even if he returned to the past, there was no way he would not be able to recognize them. The underworld. Myung's face stiffened. He had finally arrived. This can't be possible. Out of the people who were watching, the 650 people including Muyang, someone yelled out loud. Fire Dragon in. The leader of the Fire Dragon clan. It was Wu's father. On top of the highest and widest area of the arena, his whole body was shivering. Where did the rest of the kids go? Did those kids really lose? That wasn't all. The leaders of the 5 great clans who were sitting near Fire Dragon Inn were all standing up looking puzzled. Even though there were other groups that met the conditions and eliminated the judges, it was very rare, and even they were unable to kill all 5 judges. The most 2. However, not even one of the 5 judges was visible. This could only mean one thing. The judges' complete defeat. Since the impossible happened, it was obvious that there would be a commotion. Hyung Nim. Where do you think we are at? The location for the selection. Yes. If you just quietly watch, you will know. Muyang motionlessly watched them. There was a total of 20 boxes of trials. And about 7,000 beginners had passed the trial. Every group's goal was to recruit the exceptional people after continuously screening them. Even now, few recruiters, who had the information-gathering skills, were publicly skimming through them. Of course, the limitation of their skill was that they would only be able to look at the numerical value of the stats. But Muyang didn't mind, as he has already used the information distortion talisman to trick their eyes. As expected, I can't find him. When Muyang looked around, there were no signs of Wang Chunglin. However, Muyang was sure that he was somewhere around here. Muyang didn't relax. Screech. The doors of the arena opened and about 10 people with helmets and equipment adorned with a sun approached them. It seems like Alexandro Quintart prepared this event. The guild master of the Sun Guild, Alexandro Quintart. One of the top 10 humans. In fact, this arena was one of the places the Sun Guild maintained. A few men who were wearing the sun helmet entered the black door, and one man stayed behind and asked, "Can you tell me what happened inside in detail?" Sheet. Is this some joke? What are you planning to do? Aren't we returning back to where we originally came from? Unlike the rest who were carefully looking around, a man in the back ranted and raved. The person couldn't understand the current situation where he was being observed like a monkey in a zoo when he barely survived after thinking that he could return to where he came from if he just passed the grand trial with the judges. Please choose your words carefully. Great figures are present. What? Great figures? The sheet. Bang. The man wearing the sun helmet placed his thumb and his middle finger together. Like. Then a transparent wall fell from the sky and imprisoned the swearing man. Blaze. Soon an intense flare erupted inside the wall. Knock. 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 The man screamed as he slammed against the transparent wall. But in an instant, the fire completely burned the man. It was a horrifying tragedy. Afterwards, the man wearing the sun helmet asked again, "Can you tell me what happened inside in detail?" That is. I'll say it. When Taehwan was avoiding the question, Muyang stepped forward. After all, if they were to investigate, they would naturally arrive at Muyang. Since he was the first one to have contact with Wu, he decided it would be better to come out before they found any faults. As the man wearing the sun helmet nodded, Muyang acted as if he was talking about something insignificant and opened his mouth. The judge Fire Dragon Wu betrayed the other 4. What did you just say? He helped us attack the other judges. And as a result they all died. Is that the truth? If you're lying, I won't be able to assure your safety. Why would I risk my life with a lie that could instantly be proven false? Muyang had nothing to hide. Since the rest of the 650 people saw the same thing. The man wearing the sun helmet examined the people behind Muyang. He didn't find any traces of falsehood from their reactions. Could you tell me the situation in more detail? Muyang had seen Fire Dragon Wu's status viewer. History was like a stream. Although there was no way to know the finer details, he could know the significant events that had occurred in Fire Dragon Wu's life since birth. There were also some he found out when he had previously infiltrated the Fire Dragon clan. So it was enough if he could slightly adapt the truths to match his story. Fire Dragon Wu seemed to have been driven to a corner. I didn't know why, but he was impatient to show off his skills. He mumbled how he wouldn't be able to prove anything by facing against us weaklings. Gulp. The man wearing the sun helmet couldn't help but become slightly nervous. If it was false, how could Muyang know the current situation of the Fire Dragon clan? The Fire Dragon clan had adopted a son and, as a result, it was common knowledge that Fire Dragon Wu's position in the clan was obscure. However, Muyang was a beginner who had only spent a month in the temple. There was no way he could have known that. Although it was hard to believe that those words came from Fire Dragon Wu's mouth, the words Muyang said were all true. But because of this, there was a concerning matter. So that's why even Lady Code. Are you talking about that girl who used lighting? Right. Fire Dragon Wu definitely killed her. Bastard. Crush. The head of the Fire Dragon clan, Fire Dragon In, who was standing on top of platform, shot to the ground. With an incredible killing intent, he stared at Muyang as if he would kill him if he said another word. It's been a while. It felt like a long time since he had felt this much killing intent from someone. His breath became stifled and each cell in his body was on edge. However, even so, Fire Dragon In was still a coward. Fire Dragon In was one of the figures who would choose to settle than struggle. 20 years of struggling, 30 years of comfort. It had already been 50 years since humans have started being summoned into the underworld. At first, the demons were quite aggressive and humanity had to fight to survive. For 20 years, they slowly expanded their territory and at the same time, were able to reclaim a great city as well as a few other cities. However, afterwards, the attack from demons and the demon gods had stopped. People changed from fighting to protecting what they had. As a result, everyone settled down and this continued for 30 years. In 10 years, the Great Calamity will start. There was no way to know why the demon gods had stopped their attack. At one point, they just stopped attacking. However, even that would end in 10 years. After 10 years, once all humans have been summoned into the underworld, the Great Calamity will start and the demon gods will more aggressively corner humanity. No, at that point the demon gods would lead the way. It was definitely different when they previously only sent demons. After killing the Supreme Magician Merlin at the Blue Temple first, the 9 guilds and 5 great clans would collapse one after another under the cruel massacre. This was why Muyang wasn't afraid of the killing intent emitted from Fire Dragon In, who stagnated after settling down. He was still a coward. A man who kept his feet on the ground was unable to kill a man who attempted to climb the skies. How dare you lash your short tongue out to deceive the Fire Dragon clan? The truth will be clear as day once the investigation team goes in. Isn't there no need for me to lie? At this moment, Fire Dragon In's insides must have been burning. The Lawless clan was one of the 5 great clans, and although there were many who could replace Code, she was still a part of their strength. Perhaps it would have been different if there was no relationship between them, but for Fire Dragon Wu to have killed Code, who was his fiancée, it was inevitable that the relationship between the two clans would break down. Fire Dragon In's goal of raising the Fire Dragon clan to become one of the 5 great clans became difficult. Do you need to die for you to shut your mouth? However, Muyang didn't even blink. The possibility of Fire Dragon In killing Muyang was extremely low. It didn't look good for someone as established as him to punish a beginner. Above all, people could be suspicious that he killed him to shut him up. Killing to keep a secret. If he was to erase evidence in front of everyone's presence, the status of the Fire Dragon clan would completely dissipate. He cannot kill me. Muyang didn't take the lead for no reason. There was no way for the head of the Fire Dragon clan to not know this. In fact, because he was so calculating, he knew he could not lay a hand on Muyang at this time. It was just that if he was to stay still, it would be the same as admitting Fire Dragon Wu's betrayal. The Hell Horse was hidden somewhere as it observed Muyang. It was indeed a top-ranked monster. Its stealth ability was high enough to avoid the eyes of the strong. Even Muyang never had a hunch on where the horse may be up until now. Even though it said it would help, it would only take Muyang away from the crowd of powerful humans, but even that was incredible. However, there was no reason to use one of his favors. Muyang was certain that Fire Dragon In was only trying to scare him. He probably thought that if he got angry, Muyang would kneel and beg for his life. But once Muyang showed no reaction, his face revealed a hint of impatience. Head of the Fire Dragon clan, please stop. At that moment, the man sitting in the center of the platform raised his voice. Alexandros Quintart. The man who oversaw the whole situation. The master of the Sun Guild that was contending for first place among the 9 guilds. Fire Dragon wrinkled his face and said, "Just what right do you have to stop me?" It was not me but Lawless Gong who first suggested it. "First, let's set up an investigation team to investigate." Lawless Gong. If the head of the Lawless clan suggested it, then there was nothing Fire Dragon could do. From this suggestion, they could see that the relationship between the 2 clans was quickly deteriorating. It meant that he would send the investigation team in to buy some time to find a middle ground. If Fire Dragon was to get even angrier, he would lose the chance he had barely received. See. Fire Dragon who calmed his anger turned his back. Easily as if he was planning this from the start. Thump. He then jumped high into the air and returned to the platform. Hellhorse is feeling very sad. Myung only slightly smirked. Anyways, he gained enough time to climb the Sky Library. Shortly after, Alexandros Quintart opened his mouth sitting in the center of the platform. To all the small heroes that completed all the trials, we welcome you. There was no way to know if those small heroes referred to the beginners or the boys and girls who were judges. However, all the beginners, including Myung, could not find those words pleasing. The fact that the judges were affiliated with them was revealed. They indiscriminately killed people in there, yet they say they welcomed us? Bastards, someone quietly scoffed. However, if he was to say it outright, he would immediately lose his life. As they were weak, they had no right to speak. Myung clicked his tongue. Since they were starting their acceptance, it was going to be much more relaxing than the trial before. This place is the underworld. We are at war with the demon gods of the 72 seats. If we do not defeat the demon gods, we will never be able to return to Earth. Earth. It was already a name they missed. It was the secret word that could slightly divert the uncomfortable expressions of the people. Let us go back to Earth together. For that, please lend us your strength. We are going to explain everything to those who have passed the difficult trial and give you a chance to decide. The Sky Library. A long speech had started. Even though he spoke softly, his words somehow stuck to their heads. Alexandros Quintart had activated his bewilderment of the sun's skill. If time continued to pass, they would slowly be swayed and truly trust and follow the people who tried to kill them. In some sense, he had some similarities with Wang Chunglin. After talking for around 20 minutes, Alexandros Quintart smiled as he finished. We welcome you. The celebrations had started. Most the areas of the great city became public and the beginners had the right to go anywhere besides the castle in the center. Those who exited the arena could only be astonished. The castle stretched out endlessly. The buildings lined up were so tall, they would not lose out to modern cities, and the castle walls didn't lose out to the Great Wall of China. The ancient king's castle. Strictly speaking, this castle, like the Sky Library, wasn't man-made. It was only that they released a talisman containing the ancient king's castle here. Because of that, there were still unknown places within the castle. For example, the hallway with no shadows during a full moon, which was used as a route for assassinations, and the underground tunnel that would lead to a special place every 14 days. They weren't all that great, but it wasn't bad to keep note of them. This group can stay here. A soldier wearing a sun helmet herded about 100 people, including Myung, into an inn. Since 650 people couldn't use one inn, they were split up into groups. When can we enter the Sky Library? Susie's father asked. His body was at its limit. He asked since he instinctively aware that the study of the darkness spirit Myung mentioned was located in the Sky Library. Only 300 people can enter the Sky Library at once. If you wait, we will come take you there in the morning when it's your turn. So that's how it is. I understand. Once the small question was answered, everyone entered the inn. On the first floor of the inn, a plentiful array of foods was prepared. I think it's been a long time since I've seen these kinds of foods. Let's eat first. While everyone was deeply moved and rushed to pick up their forks, Myung quietly went up to the second floor and unpacked. Was this an unavoidable destiny? Myung looked around his room and shook his head. This inn was the exact same one Mu-young stayed in the past. He was kidnapped here and used as an assassin for a long time. He had killed countless heroes. Tonight. Mu-young took a deep breath and calmed himself. Wang Chenglin's beginner hunt would commence tonight. Deep into the night of a full moon. Everyone was passed out drunk. There was an endless supply of alcohol, and because it had been a long time since they could get drunk, their hearts relaxed. Swish. With the speed of light, a man wearing a mask flowed through the window. The masked man looked around after spreading sleeping powder. He spotted a man sleeping on a bed and cautiously approached him with light steps. Just when he was about to attack the man on the bed. Grasp. His opponent's closed eyes suddenly opened and grasped the masked man's throat. He precisely hit a pressure point and the masked man couldn't make a sound. The opponent stared at the masked man with a completely expressionless face and quietly said, "It's been a long time, number 447.